Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are when you watch this conversation. My name is Stanley Lowe, and I am the Chief Development Officer for the Lower Marshall Shadeland Neighborhood Development Initiative. To my right is former Mayor Tom Murphy, also formerly with the Urban Land Institute, and we have a board member from LSDI, Ray Sean Smith, who is here, who lives in Lower Marshall Shadeland. And the Director of Research is Dr. Daniel Holland. And we're here today because I've asked them to come spend some time with me to talk about a number of things. But for me, a large part of this conversation comes from my spirit. We are engaged in one of the, what I call, most transformative periods in Pittsburgh's history. And if no one calls it out, at least we will have documented that it's going on. In the last 15 to 20 years, we've lost close to 10,000 African Americans from the city, and it's almost 13% of the population. So we want to talk about that and what we think is going on about that. We also want to spend some time talking about how all of us have been involved in it one way or another, and what we think some of the ideas are and some of the problems are. Later on, we're going to be talking about a publication we're going to be releasing that talks about Pittsburgh's 17 African American neighborhoods, where they're at, the state of the neighborhoods, the fact that we've lost 3 African American neighborhoods, which have already flipped to majority white neighborhoods. So we have a lot of things that we're going to be talking about today. And again, thank all 3 of you for being here with us today. I think the thing I want to start off about is while we engage in Lower Marshall Shadeland, part of the reason is my family lives there. My niece lives on Shadeland Avenue, and then Ray Sean lives on California Avenue. How long have you been there?
About 2.5 years.
You got to speak up so they can hear.
About 2.5 years.
And without sugarcoating anything, tell us your ups and downs and what it's like living there.
It's a headache. I bought the property because trying to get a loan and get approved for other properties was a fight, whether it was with the city or the banks. The options were limited.
This is your truth.
Yes,
Okay.
because I've tried to buy, abandoned properties, and they told me, yeah, I could, but I couldn't. They wouldn't approve me for a construction loan to change them or fix them. So I had to reroute my strategy to get what I could afford. It's not what I really wanted, but it's what I could afford at the time. Now doing that, not knowing what's going on in the neighborhood later on after I moved there, it's not the best, because we have bars in our neighborhood, which causes commotion and unrest, because you have the loitering, the littering, the intoxication, which causes the fights and the shootouts and the unnecessary stuff, which makes it unsafe for the kids, the elderly, and it's
difficult.
Yes, and part of it I feel too is there's a lack of education and communication with the people that can help or will help.
You had an incident where you called the city. You live next door to a bar.
Yes.
And you had an incident where you called the city, and you want to tell that story briefly?
It's a lot of construction, unsanctioned construction that they're doing, and the city puts things on hold, or they say we don't have the manpower to check it out right away, and there's no help. So you're constantly fighting, with these bars next to your houses. You have to go to work the next day, noise, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
People parking in your driveways. People sitting on your steps. Using drugs, selling drugs, or whatever the case may be. And then you can't get any help. So it makes you not want to live there anymore.
That segues into one of the reasons we got involved. And through the funding from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, NCRC, and the Allegheny Foundation, they funded us both to look at revitalizing the neighborhood by way of fixing up vacant and vandalized buildings, and also doing research so that we could better acquaint ourselves with what's actually occurring. Dan, you spent some time, we spent some time in the neighborhood doing some studies in terms of, well, let's talk about the first study we did in terms of vacant and vandalized buildings and the community outreach and those things.
Yeah, we walked every street and documented all the vacant properties there. We matched it up against what the county recorder of deeds had. And we found that there were 434 vacant properties in the community in Marshall-Shadeland. And of that, a subset, that was a smaller area that we're focused on, the lower Marshall-Shadeland area. That's where the majority of them are, almost 300. So it's about a third of the properties there are vacant. So, and they're owned, various owners who live in the area or the city. Some live in Tokyo, Japan, or Fairbanks, Alaska. So it's all over the place. So that was one of the first things we did, is document how many vacant properties there are in the community.
Second thing we did, when we did the documentation in the neighborhood, we had Latarge Tinker. We hired an architect and we hired an attorney to make sure we were in the right footing. And Latarge walked around the neighborhood, and we took pictures of the houses. We did appraisals of the houses. We thought through title searches on the properties to look at what it would take to fix the houses up. One of the reasons we wanted to do that was to see if we could take it through the Pennsylvania Conservatorship Program. You want to talk about that briefly?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the flip side is many of these vacant properties are ideal candidates for rehab and reuse. Some weren't in terrible condition, so they could be rehabbed. The key to that, as you pointed out, is acquiring them. And if we can acquire them through a conservatorship process, which is a legal process that you go through a judge to get clear title of the property, then you can raise the necessary funds from financial institutions or foundations and fix it up and make it affordable for the people to live, who want to live in the neighborhood, to stay in the neighborhood.
One of the things I want to point out, everything is never the way it really seems to be. You got to make sure you have the correct legal advice. You got to make sure that you have the resources to do that, to continue to move that forward. And that's what we're engaged in right now, making sure we have the correct legal standing to continue to move forward. But in another sense, we were not only engaged in the process of thinking through what was happening in Lower Marshall-Shadeland, we also received funding to talk about what was happening with respect to bank lending in the city of Pittsburgh, and whether or not the issue of financial institutions being engaged in this process was hurting or harming the process. So earlier on, we did something that wasn't thought about before. We did a research project, and that research project, we entitled that Inherited Inequality. And based upon this document, we said wouldn't it be interesting that if you went back and looked back over the last 15 to 20 years, at every dollar that the city spent on affordable housing, city being the Urban Redevelopment Authority, being the Pennsylvania Highway Finance Agency, being the banks, being wherever money was being spent on affordable housing, where did it go, how much was spent, and who was doing what? Again, Dan, I'm going to let you talk briefly about that, but I'm going to give my opinion in terms of where I think we're at right now in terms of how it's happening.
Sure. Well, yeah, so we tallied up all the public funds for affordable housing, and about $3.4 billion it was spent on various projects in and around the city. And no one had ever done this before, so we had to create this document from the Housing Authority, so it's public housing dollars, Urban Redevelopment Authority, CDBG funds, and city. And that sounds like a big number. So over 10 years, 3.4 billion. But then we looked at the bank financing over the same period. It was triple that, if not quadruple. It was almost 15 billion. So in other words, the banks are doing far more financing of affordable housing by far than the city or city agencies. But it's very uneven. So almost all of the public funds are being spent, or many of them are being concentrated in low and moderate income and African American neighborhoods. The bank financing, the flip side is that almost all of it is in upper income, wealthy areas.
So in essence, we're going through a process because we were able to trace the money. We knew where the money went. Just to give you an understanding of how we did that, we went back and looked at every Urban Redevelopment Authority Board of Directors meeting minutes in terms of where they authorized the spending. Where every agency spent money, we went back, traced it to where it went, traced it back to the neighborhoods, tried to determine how the money was spent. So in essence, you have the city spending $15 billion on affordable housing, but the city's spending close to $3 billion on affordable housing, but they're being spent in majority black neighborhoods. And when you look at that, what we're confronted with right now is that a vast majority of affordable housing that's taking place is being financed by the city. It just more simple there, and there's never going to be enough money of city. There's never going to be enough city money to do affordable housing. Tom raises some points in terms of it's just not the bank lending. There are other lending as well, but we did trace the money. We also found out that when you take a neighborhood, and we're not knocking neighborhoods, we're just looking at the money. Give me some examples, Squirrel Hill versus Homewood or Squirrel Hill.
Well, the best example is lending to one neighborhood, in one upper income white neighborhood of Shadyside, was the loan dollars was more than all the black neighborhoods combined. So it was over $1 billion over the course of 15 years versus about 600 million for all of the black neighborhoods in the city. Homewood, Hill, Manchester, Knoxville, etc., all around. So, and only about 3% of the total dollars spent, loaned out by banks was going to African Americans. The city is about a quarter African American, but only 3% of that. And that doesn't mean that there weren't loan applications from African Americans. There were a lot. There were over 16,000 loan applications, but only 3% of the dollars went to blacks.
You know, it's interesting in terms of how we state the facts because it's there. You look at the numbers, and we're not here to beat up on anyone to say that. We just want to point out what's going on. One thing that I found very interesting about that, because the banks do, to the best of their ability, do indicate the lending by race. You want to talk about African Americans versus other races?
Sure. Well, African Americans were the only racial category of all the racial groups on the Census Bureau's website that had a higher decline rate. So more African Americans are being rejected for loans than are being approved. That's the only racial group, and that includes Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and whites.
But you know, yes, I am going to interrupt you. But when you look at that, the thing that people will say is African Americans, it's a credit problem.
Well, right, yeah, and we looked at that, and credit is the number one reason why African Americans are being denied loans. But when you look at some institutions that are actually doing really well, they figured it out. So it's a solvable problem. So if we can fix the credit problem or fix credit among borrowers, then the lending inevitably will increase. 20 years
ago, I know because I was engaged with the struggle when I formed the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. I was engaged in the struggle with the Dollar Bank. There's a bank president named Steve Hansen. And I had a conversation with then Mayor Sophie Masloff and Ben Haler, the finance director, about Dollar Bank. 25 years later, they're the leader in terms of lending in African American neighborhoods. And because they've said, well, there are many reasons people can't receive loans. You've talked about your frustration with getting that. they have an in-house credit counseling program. So at the end of the route, not only can they help people with credit counseling, they can help finance a loan as well. The other interesting thing when you look at the numbers, and I keep saying interesting because the numbers are there, is that more Asians, is that not correct? Got more loans at 5% of the total population than African Americans being at 20% of the population. Tom and I had a conversation earlier, and he's helped me understand some things a little bit better. I remember Steve Leeper, who used to run the housing department at Urban Redevelopment Authority. He called one day and he said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because we're having better partnerships now with financial institutions to make things happen in the community." And for a while there, things did improve. When you look at lending 20 years ago versus today, what do the numbers say?
Well, we documented what was happening in the early to mid 90s, and the lending today is less than what was happening 30 years ago.
So technically, there's more government lending for affordable housing today than there was back then, and they're essentially underwriting the vast majority of affordable housing for the African American communities.
Well, right. I guess one way to look at it is the wealth is not being created from the bank lending. Wealth, whatever lending is being created is for affordable housing is in African American neighborhoods is only being done by the public sector. And when you look at how wealth is created in this country, it's through mortgage lending and through banks. It's not, people don't go down to City Hall to get a loan to fix up their house or to buy a house. They go to a bank. If the banks are shutting them off, then they can't build wealth, and that's why you have this huge wealth gap, not only locally but nationally.
Again, it goes over my head time and time again. I've known the mayor, I call him the mayor, 20, 30 years?
More than that.
More than that. I remember when I was a kid, and they used to
Almost 50 years.
Almost 50 years now. I remember when I was a kid, they did spend a lot of time and money taking us different places so we could see. So when you go to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and know that it was once an African-American neighborhood in D.C., when you go to New York City and know that there was an African-American neighborhood sitting in the middle of Central Park, when you go to Fredericksburg, Annapolis, and you know that there were points in history that we now see as wealthy neighborhoods that were once African-American neighborhoods, you say to yourself, when did it change? What made that happen? The decline in the African-American population, and I'm gonna stay there because I'm old enough now that I can say and comfortably say, I want to document that we're at the moment, this is a reflection period that unless we address it, it's going to get worse. Dan, and when we look at these numbers, the numbers are the worst since the Civil War?
Well, the population decline in the city percentage-wise over just the last decade was about 13%, as you said. That's the greatest percentage decline in our black population since the 1850s. The only reason it went down in the 1850s was the fugitive slave law was being enforced, so many African Americans left. So we have a
wait.
So,
now, when you hear that, if you're black and you're living in this city and you're saying the population loss is the worst since 1850, it is a reflection moment. And the neighborhoods we're talking about include Belle Souvre Bon Air, California, Kirkbride, Manchester. And for those who are wondering why I'm putting some of this together, is because the federal government now have lumped census tracts together. So where you may have just had Manchester is now California, Kirkbride, Manchester, East Hills, East Liberty, Fineview, Garfield. In the Hill District, we have Bedford Dwellings, Crawford Roberts, the Middle Hill, the Upper Hill, Terrace Village, and West Oakland. In Homewood, North, South, and West in Homewood. Then you have Knoxville, Latimer, Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar, Marshall, Shaveland, Northview Heights, Summer Hill, North Point Breeze, and Perry South. Those are neighborhoods we focused on in terms of loss of black population. And My concern is that I don't hear discussion about that. And we've got to have a discussion not only about that, but how do we stem the tide. Tom had an interesting point today in terms of not only the issue of partnerships, but there's a broader issue that he helps bring to the table. Tom?
It is really about partnerships. It's about, I don't think the banks are being malicious. I think they are doing their job, meaning as they see it. And somebody needs to help them to see that there's a broader context to what they can do. And I think that's the role of the public agency. Could be the city, could be a nonprofit, but somebody needs to build that partnership to understand how you bring the private money and the public money together and how you work with citizens, people who want to buy houses, because I agree with both of you that home ownership is the key to creating wealth. And for too long, we've not worked to create home ownership. So I remember starting a program that you did called Ain't I a Woman,
right.
with public housing residents, and it was a combination church revival financial literacy program, and you talked about the dream of owning a house, where for many people that's not something they ever thought they could do. And then you had the banks there with tables that people could go over and they look up their credit and say, if you do this and this and this over the next year, we could qualify you for a loan. And then there we had very good deferred mortgages that Steve Leeper put a program together where the bank and the city partnered to put money together to make houses affordable and to help people to be able to buy houses for the first time. So that it's a whole combination. It's a dance that has to go together like a ballet. And that doesn't exist right now. And so the banks are doing their thing as they see under all the rules that they have to deal with from the federal government, doing what they're supposed to do. And they're not partnering with people in the community to build a bigger vision of what can happen. And I live in a neighborhood, one of those neighborhoods you called out, for the last 50 years this year, okay? And when we first applied for a mortgage, Stanley, 50 years ago, we were denied by 8 financial institutions because then they redlined our neighborhood. Why did they redline it? Because they saw it as, quote, changing. And so finally we got to know one of the bankers, and he said, look, this is the directives we get. No mortgages under $15,000, and back then our mortgage was less than $15,000. And in certain neighborhoods we don't want to give mortgages, and it was very blatant. And it was not about race. It ended up being about race, but it was. It was just as easy for them to do a $50,000 mortgage as it was to do a $15,000 mortgage and then make more money. And so you need to change that conversation. And I think that's the role the public has in playing and working with the banks to change that conversation.
Do you think that's going on now?
No, it's not going on, and that's I think why your document is so valuable, because it lays out what happens if you don't have that vigilance and you don't have that kind of partnership and are committed to it. Then that's what's causing, I think, the problem you're seeing. And it's also being caused by broader issues, right? I live in one of these neighborhoods.
What's going on in your neighborhood?
Well, you hear gunshots, right? And you worry about where your kid's going to go to school. And if I have enough income and I'm not committed to the neighborhood, I probably move to a place that's safer and probably have a better school district. And I bet if you began to track, particularly younger people with kids in school, track where they're moving, I bet they're looking at school districts as a way where they want to go. That's a big challenge for the city, of how people make choices about where they want to live.
Given what I remember when you moved up there and telling people, has it been 50 years?
50 years this year.
Mayor, do you have hope for your neighborhood?
I do. I see it. I've been on a roller coaster, slow moving roller coaster with our neighborhood. It starts as a predominantly white neighborhood, working class. Our neighbors were a Greek family on one side and an African American family on the other side. It became probably 75% African American, and it got really bad. in terms of crime. I mean, we were hearing gunshots every night. Several people were shot in front of our house, in our backyard. So we lived through all that. It's gotten quieter. We are looking at, within our front porch and back porch, I can see 15 vacant houses. And I know the stories of those vacant houses, why they're vacant. Generally people got older and their kids didn't want them and they just walked away because there was no value that they saw in those houses. And so what does it mean to walk away from a house?
And then
This is your family's house typically.
well, then
right?
tell me about the hope you see.
The hope I see is that I start seeing younger families move into our neighborhood,
Black families?
black families and white families.
Okay.
And so, but not at a high rate. And as you can see by statistics, at a very low rate compared to what's going on in other neighborhoods, like in Lawrenceville so and within, like you just mentioned in Marshall Shadeland, 400 and some vacant houses in our neighborhood. I walk our dog around our neighborhood. Probably within 5 blocks of our neighborhood, or our house, is probably 100 vacant houses. Some of which ought to be torn down. Some of which are good brick houses that could be rehabbed.
But let's hold that thought.
But that's the partnership. Somebody needs to take that initiative.
But look, go back to the numbers again. 400 in Marshall Shadeland, 400 in your neighborhood.
Probably, if you look at the
If we look at the numbers, but let's be realistic about this. Even if we tear some down, you can't tear them all down. If we just for a minute separate the families out, give me the numbers in terms of what it would cost just to fix these houses up. And you're right, it is about leadership. So if we're looking at
it's not about money. Let me just say, when you say give me the cost,
Okay.
it's not about money. There is lots of money. The city just did a bond issue for $30 million. There's probably another $20 million between the federal government and other sources. So there might be $50 million of public money.
So we have the money.
We don't have the partnership right now. We don't have the process that gets these houses under control in a timely way. Like he was talking about how hard it is to buy a hot property. I bought 10 vacant lots next to our house that had houses on them. I can tell you the story of each house. I bought them through the city. It took 1.5 years, almost 2 years. This is after I left as mayor, so I wasn't pulling any strings. Okay. And so, but I know the hassle of what it takes. And we built a system that was moving 2,000 properties a year that were tax delinquent back into moving somewhere into a clear title so that they could be sold. Why that fell apart, I don't know, but that's the challenge. The city is blessed and cursed with lots of vacant property that could create hundreds, if not thousands, of affordable housing units. And that they have not built the system and then the partnership with a financial institution to make it happen. So it's not about money. It's about building that system and fundamentally the leadership that can bring those people together around the table and make it happen. There is money.
How much time do we have?
I mean, it's going to, the market is the market. It's going to continue, okay? Right. And I'm going to say what is happening as a city with young people coming to Pittsburgh because of the technology economy. The market is going to continue to drive African Americans who are not well versed in being able to get a mortgage, because historically in the African community there was not high property ownership, and so we have a son who's 33 years old. I just was at a Christmas party with
TJ is
33, and with a half a dozen of his friends, and we were having at his Christmas party having a financial literacy conversation, because all of them would love to buy a house. They have no clue how to proceed to buy a house. Some of them have decent jobs, some of them are probably right at the edge, but they're black and white, but they don't have a clue how they would go buy a house. These are largely single people who are, people don't get married young anymore, and so it really struck me the opportunity for the city. to build a really, really dynamic system of helping people get into home ownership. And you would, if you did that, you would create a huge value. Do you remember? I mean, this is going back lots of years. We created the Great House Sale.
Yes.
And we did it in what was now the Mexican War Street.
Yes.
But there were lots of vacant houses.
Can you believe the Mexican War Street then versus today?
So there were lots of vacant houses, like
Absolutely.
Shadeland Marshall or Perry South
Right,
or
right.
Homewood. And we got 50 houses from the city. We cleared the title, we being a neighborhood group, and we cleared the title, and we had a great house sale. We publicized it, and you could come in and buy a house for $1, and if you qualified,
Oh, you didn't know that, did you?
you qualified, we would wrap around
The financing.
We'd work with the banks to wrap around to both a construction loan. You'd have to commit to live in the house for 2 years after you've gotten it fixed up. And why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we doing that with these houses that are sitting there as liabilities that could be assets in the 13 neighborhoods I'm talking about?
You know, you raise an interesting point in terms of the partnerships and the programs. Again, you know, I take a moment and I stop because, quite frankly, I'm afraid. I'm really afraid at the disinvestment that's going on with respect to African Americans leaving the city, and the fact that we don't hear a lot more discussion, public discourse about that. We're in the process. We're getting ready to publish Pittsburgh's Vanishing Black Neighborhoods. Pittsburgh's Vanishing Black Neighborhoods. And I'm going to wait to the end to talk about the 3 that have already flipped. I don't know about you, but I mean, with some people, it just rolls off that, okay, fine, so we're losing African Americans in the city. Well, it's not that simple. It's like you're losing part of your family. It's just leaving. And you know that it won't be the same. I mean, it's over. 3 neighborhoods have completely flipped now. Done. And so we trace that, and we're going to be publishing a report, Pittsburgh's Vanishing Black Neighborhoods, that details what's happening and why we think a lot of it's happening. And it goes also back to Tom's point and Rayshawn's point in terms of the complexities that's happening in the various neighborhoods. It's just not about bank lending, but if you can't get the resources, and if in fact you're having gentrification take place or you're having people move in, something's going on. Dan, when you were helping put this together with a lot of input from African Americans, from the neighborhoods, from the banks, what are some of the major points?
Right. Well, as I mentioned before, there's kind of 3 big points I think that were the takeaways. One is obviously, as you emphasized, the demographic decline, but it is very uneven. There's only, I think, one neighborhood that's actually gained African American populations.
Now, hold that thought. Now, can anyone guess what neighborhood has gained African American population?
Shady Side.
No.
No, of the black neighborhoods.
Of the
only
black
one.
neighborhoods, which black neighborhood has gained population?
Homewood.
No. But it's Northview.
And only, well, yeah, and partly because
Of immigration.
well, and they combined with Summer Hill, so they combined, which is a largely white neighborhood.
But just stop for a minute. I'm going to keep interrupting you because I was up in Summer Hill and I was in Northview last week. We were up there. I was talking with the residents. We were hugging and kissing. We were having a good time, and you were able to see Northview Heights on one side, and you come out of Northview Heights, you go to the other side, you see Summer Hill where they have private sector housing. Now picture that. Now, how much money was lent up there?
I don't remember the exact.
It was $40-some million. 40 million over, 40 million, and maybe 6% went to African Americans. But I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Well, so one is the demographic decline citywide, as we've talked about. It's 10,660 African Americans decline, or the population declined by that many. It's 13%, and it was very uneven. So majority of the decline occurred in African American neighborhoods. So no surprise there. Hill, Homewood, Manchester, Marshall, Shadeland.
Now, whoever's watching this, I know you're going to get tired of me stopping you. Over the last 15, 20 years, what was the total decline of people from the city of Pittsburgh?
Well, in the last 10 years, it was 13% or 10,660.
No, people, period.
10,000. 10,000.
Of the 10,000, how many? What was the percentage of Africans?
Sorry, let me clarify. The city lost about 1% of its population overall in a decade.
So that's about 30,000.
3,000.
Yeah, it was about 3,000.
3,000.
But it lost 10,000 African Americans. So the majority of the city's population loss was because it lost black people.
Okay.
So we have not gained population since 1950.
And of the population that we're losing now, it's predominantly African Americans.
Yes.
Any other major points?
Well, Pittsburgh, of the comparable cities around the country, we're ranked third for loss of African Americans. I think St. Louis and Cleveland may have lost more.
So of all of the major cities, Pittsburgh size, I'm calling it out. Of all the cities, Pittsburgh size, in the United States of America, we rank number 3 in terms of losing African American population.
Yeah, that's right. So, so the other point I want to make, the big point I think we have to look at is the bank lending. And bank lending has been extremely uneven. So we didn't just look at 1 or 2 years. We looked at 15 years. It's the longest study we've ever done. And of that, there's been $15 billion loaned out by banks and for home mortgage loans, home improvement, refinance. But of that $15 billion, only 3% went to African Americans citywide. Just 3%. African Americans are about 24% of the population, but only 3% of the loan dollars.
Tom?
I mean, this is a classic legacy issue. I mean, it was called redlining at one time, okay? And so what it did in effect is create in low-income neighborhoods, and were primarily African American, no ability to have home ownership. And I think what we're doing is living with that result. I mean, my experience was in dealing with a lot of people, is that it was hard for them to imagine owning a house because nobody in their family ever grew up owning a house. And so I think this is why it's multifaceted. I think part of it is the banks need to be more aware of this, and I think your study will maybe help that. But there also needs to be a proactive effort to educate people and to work and to build a fairly clear road. As I said before, I think for not just African Americans, but for young people, the idea of owning a home is hard to figure out. And so how do you make that road easier for people? And where do you create the partnerships, the public and private partnership, to make it easy for people to get into home ownership? Not too easy, because they need to understand the responsibility of owning a home, but easy enough that they just say, well, I can't do this.
Sure. Well, let me just also say something very important about this study. We looked at pre-Great Recession and post-Great Recession. So we started with 2007,
Right.
and so when you say it's a legacy, this is a recent legacy, because as you know, under your administration, working with Stanley Lowe and others, we actually turned the corner. I was there. We were part of that. I remember, developing the A9 Woman program and many other programs. The banks were invested in the neighborhoods. They were keeping banks branches open, etc., and they were making things happen. The housing recovery program, PHP, and all these others. But since the Great Recession, things have just dropped off. There hasn't been as much bank investment. In fact, we've identified several individual institutions that are egregious in terms of their lack of lending. We've documented more than 500 banks that haven't made one loan in the entire city of Pittsburgh in 15 years. And some of these have made hundreds or dozens of loans to whites, but no loans to African Americans. And some of these banks have received passing grades from the federal government for their lending. So they're being given a pass to do business, including one bank in your own neighborhood.
Yeah.
They're being given a pass to do business only with white folks and ignoring African Americans and contributing to this major problem. So we identified some of these institutions in this report.
All right, I'm gonna catch you off guard. It's not staged. You don't know I'm getting ready to do this, okay? I'm gonna go down this list of the neighborhoods we just talked about. To the best of your knowledge, tell me what you think is currently going on in that neighborhood. If you don't, we'll pass. And at the same time, if we come to a neighborhood that is flipped, let me know if the neighborhood is flipped, okay? So we're going to go through all the African American neighborhoods. We're going to talk about some of the points in these neighborhoods, and this is the point you're going to learn to see if that neighborhood is flipped from a African American, black neighborhood to a majority white neighborhood. Alphabetically, Belle Souvre, Bon Air.
So remains fairly affordable. It's decreased somewhat in terms of the African American population, but nothing too great. That and Knoxville are actually part of there's been some growth of African Americans in the South Hills, but not a whole lot. So it's kind of stable. Housing values are fairly low. There hasn't been a whole lot of appreciation.
California, Kirkbride, Manchester.
Probably the most expensive black neighborhood in the city for obvious reasons. There's been a lot of rehab, some new construction, etc. And there has been a decrease in African Americans as well. But it remains a solid African American neighborhood.
East Hills.
Very low price appreciation, not a lot of development going on, and some exodus of African Americans as well.
East Liberty.
East Liberty is the number one, what we call the number one gentrified neighborhood, or one of them anyway. Lost over
has it flipped?
1,500. It's flipped. It was 68% African American. Now it's 46% or 42%. And I live 3 blocks from it, and I see it. I don't recognize it anymore.
I don't either.
I don't know who the housing is being built for, but yeah.
You don't recognize it either anymore?
I don't recognize that.
You know, you had a major role in tearing those
Yeah,
buildings.
we did.
Yeah,
And we built hundreds of
Yeah.
affordable units,
you certainly did.
subsidized, but we didn't stay and focus enough on home ownership.
Fine View.
Fine View, it's 51% African American, fairly stable. There's been some loss of African Americans, but not a whole lot. So it remains somewhat affordable.
Garfield.
Garfield, it's kind of because it's so close to East Liberty, has decreased significantly. There's been a huge decrease in African Americans. It's one of the few neighborhoods where whites actually can easily get a loan where African Americans cannot.
The Hill District, which encompasses Bedford Dwellings, Crawford Roberts, the Middle Hill, Upper Hill, Terrace Village, and West Oakland.
Yeah, and West Oakland, Terrace Village, West Oakland is one of the other kind of neighborhoods as part of the Hill that actually lost, or that is no longer African American. So the Hill as a whole is, but not Terrace Village, West Oakland. But the Hill as a whole, it's kind of a mixed bag. It depends where you are. There's been a lot of public money being put into, especially at Bedford Dwellings.
Is there more public money there than private bank money going in?
Yes, it's one of the few neighborhoods.
I'm
where-
sorry?
You've got to be significant more public money.
Yeah, and so again, it's a great it's an opportunity waiting to happen for banks, but it hasn't yet.
So, say it another way, given the level of public money that's being invested in the Hill District, that is a leveraging opportunity, support opportunity for private sector investment as well.
100%.
Homewood, north, south, and west. Homewood.
Yeah, Homewood, like Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar, is also a neighborhood that has a lot more public funding. and almost or very little bank financing. But we're seeing a lot of applications from African Americans in coming out of Homewood, but they're being denied at very high rates.
Isn't Homewood one of the, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth, but if I remember from the study that we did, and I'm going back, there is more money being lent by the taxpayers, by the public sector, than the private sector.
Yes, absolutely.
So, in essence, and this is for all housing,
Yes, it's just for housing.
just for housing. So, if it's affordable housing, private house, whatever you're talking about, in Homewood, the government, us, the taxpayers, I'm not saying it negatively, I'm only referring to what's occurring. Even with the government undergirding Homewood, we still have massive African American black population loss in the city.
Yes.
Knoxville,
Knoxville, I think, would be about the only neighborhood that has gained African Americans, but it, like Beltsuver, has also not a lot of price appreciation, not a lot of movement. It's kind of stabilized right now.
okay. I'm going to go back for a minute because we did say, no, we'll come to that one. Larimer.
Larimer's interesting. They got that $30 million choice grant from HUD. But what we found is that only 3% of all the loans are going to African Americans in the neighborhood that's over 80% African American. So
Wait, say that again.
only 3% of all bank loans going to Larimer are going to African Americans. The vast
And what's the
majority,
percentage of African Americans living?
like it's 80% or more.
And 3% of all private sector dollars.
Right.
Okay.
So how can you create wealth in a neighborhood that relies only on public sector financing?
Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar.
Right, and like Homewood, East Hills, it's kind of linked to that larger kind of population decline, a lot of vacant houses, not a lot of bank lending.
Marshall, Shadeland.
Yeah. Now, Marshall Shadeland, the only reason we included that here is that it's 48% African American. So it's one of the only neighborhoods in the city that's about half African American, half white. But even there, the lending has been very uneven. As I documented, one bank that has been in the neighborhood since 1930 has only done 3 loans to African Americans in 15 years. So there are many, many affordable opportunities there, but it just hasn't flipped. On the other hand, I think because it still remains somewhat affordable, it has had decline of African Americans, but it remains affordable for now until
Until it's discovered.
until it's discovered and people start, and we've even noticed that there have been hundreds of properties. In fact, the majority of those in that concentrated area I talked about, Lower Marshall Shadeland, are outside investors. So that means that the deep pocket investors are starting to pick up the bargains in the neighborhood.
Marshall, Shadeland, like Manchester's a gateway, one of the remaining gateways coming into the city.
Yeah.
And as you said, let's flip this back around so statistically you can understand what's happening. In terms of property values in Manchester, what did you say?
It's the priciest. It's the most expensive black neighborhood in the city.
No one heard that. Say it again.
Manchester is the most expensive housing market of all African American neighborhoods.
And what does that say about affordability for affordable housing then?
Well, there's not a lot of affordable housing left.
You grew up in Manchester, didn't you?
Yes, and Manchester is not Manchester anymore.
You didn't know it was a high rent district.
When I lived in Manchester, you knew every family on every street. Everybody from mom, grandparents. Now, I don't know half the people there. I see people that walk up and down the street, majority white, that look at me like, what are you doing over here? And it's like, we've been here, 60-some years, my family.
Mm-hmm.
Like my grandfather practically built the house
Mm-hmm.
on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Oh, he was a good plasterer, plumber. I mean, he did everything.
He made me help, keep it up. I've been underneath the porch soldering the pipes when they bust in the wintertime, carpentry. And now that his house is gone, to a white family, the house is almost $400,000 now. So affordable housing in Manchester is not affordable anymore.
Northview Heights, Summer Hill.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the tale of two neighborhoods, as you mentioned. They're literally, the Census Bureau combines the two, but they're very different. Summer Hill is almost all white, and then the other plateau is the public housing community of Northview Heights. And they have added some population, some black African Americans, primarily, as you mentioned, immigrants have moved in. But for African Americans to get a loan in this neighborhood is very difficult because there's just very few loans being made to African Americans there.
North Point Breeze.
North Point Breeze is the third neighborhood that has flipped from majority African American to now majority white. And they lost, I think, 44% of their black population in just 10 years. And it's probably the second most expensive neighborhood. And what's interesting is North Point Breeze still is about in the 40-some% African American. One block over, on the other side of Penn, is Point Breeze, which is about 1% black. So you have these dividing lines, but it's quickly blurring. And the only thing kind of preventing more investment from occurring further down into Homewood is the busway and the train tracks that separate Homewood from North Point Breeze. So you've got these kind of pockets of various levels of investment and then maybe another half mile the other direction, Shady Side, which is probably the most expensive neighborhood in the city.
Perry South.
Perry South, where you live, it's, as you've said, there's been some investment from banks. It's almost all residential, but there's been a lot of African American population loss, which probably explains why you see so many vacant properties around.
So, in going over the list, and this is what we're focusing in, vanishing black neighborhoods, because I doubt if anyone's going to remember this in important history, but I wanted to be one of those who took a minute to stand up to say, it matters. It doesn't matter. Briefly name those three neighborhoods again.
So you've got East Liberty, North Point Breeze, and Terrace Village, West Oakland have all flipped from majority black to non-majority black.
Question someone's probably thinking that they've not asked. Given the research that we've done, what's next? Of these that are here, what are closest to being next?
Well, Garfield, definitely. Manchester, I think is about 60% African American. Perry South. Fine View. Yeah. And then, the big question mark is Marshall Shadeland. Which way is it going to go? And that's not necessarily a bad thing either way, but the question is, what's its identity? And how do people feel in the neighborhood? What's the vibe of the neighborhood? That's what this generation talks about. And I think there's a good vibe in it right now. That just, granted, there's some issues with nuisance bars and so on, but there's a good vibe there. It's affordable.
Talk about the veterans.
And it's one of the top neighborhoods for veterans. Where are they going to go? As veterans return from various deployments, Marshall Shadeland is one of the top neighborhoods in the city for veterans. And so what opportunity are we creating for veterans that can be a great opportunity citywide, that could be expanded elsewhere?
We're going to have to wrap up, but before we do, no, I'm going to take the last word. Ray Sean, given your involvement in this discussion and given your involvement in living in Marshall Shalin, if you wanted anyone to know anything about you or what's happening, what would your thoughts be?
My thing is, my question is there a plan, a future plan for Pittsburgh or these certain neighborhoods that blacks aren't included in? I've seen subtle changes that happen so quickly that we're wondering why. Like say, what's that?
Blacks have left so quickly, you forgot, huh?
Yes, but Chateau Street.
Right.
Chateau Street used to be 3 lanes. Overnight, no warning, no flyers in the door, it was 1 lane. You have all these bike lanes and little things that pop up in the neighborhoods. Why? When we were young, they didn't care about Manchester or none of these other. Why the change? I feel like there's a slow, subtle push of the blacks out of the neighborhoods. But why?
Given the research and things that you've been through, name 4 things that stand out in terms of, not that there's no answer, but it's the wonder question. I wonder.
Well, I guess for me, it's the big question that Tom raised was what you said, what's the plan? There are partnerships, there are great opportunities to take advantage of vacant properties, to take advantage of lending, if banks really wanted to do more business in this neighborhood, in neighborhoods, in black neighborhoods, it would seize upon this report and say, this is our plan. But they haven't. And the regulators need to take a much greater role in that as well. We just revised CRA for the first time since 1995. And that should lay out a very clear strategy for how banks can invest and how regulators can encourage banks and how the city and county governments and state government can encourage more partnerships and more innovative programs. But we're not seeing that yet. I hope we will someday, maybe, but that to me is the big takeaway, that this is kind of a document of action.
Tom.
Well, it really starts with leadership. The plan is important. I think everybody, my experience, we did billions of dollars worth of development when I was mayor. One, I had great staff, people that understood how to be creative and had an appetite for risk. But it was, if you lay out a clear plan that's dynamic and exciting, and you say, this is our part of it and we need you to be in this part of it, people are more comfortable about that than just sort of being driven by the market. And understand that what you're talking about is being market driven. Is that the demand in the market is driving, whether it's East Liberty or Perry South, for better or for worse, whether the market's going up or down, there are forces at play always that are going to, and so we would look at neighborhoods and say, how do we intervene, and what is the cost of intervention to get the neighborhood to stabilize? And in my mind, there were sort of 3 types of neighborhoods. There's the shady sides that are stable and it's a healthy economic market. There are those that with a little public assistance could be helpful. And there are those that need a lot of public assistance to get the market to participate. And that's where the leadership comes in. That's how you get the banks to participate in a neighborhood that they perceive as a risk, have a higher risk, and that they want to absorb in investing in houses. And I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's people coming together, but somebody being the leader that lays out, this is what we're going to do. And that's not happening right now.
40 years ago, I guess it was 40, I've lost track. I was sitting at my desk, and I remember calling Aggie Bros, Harriet Henson, Dolores Swatworth, Rhonda Brandon, Betty Jane Ralph, Arthur Ralph, Tilly Janecki, Matilda Smith, and saying, you know what? We're getting a shaft. There's the lending's not going on in the neighborhoods. We called one of the first meetings and we said, we need to figure out how much money we need to fix our neighborhoods. Back then, they weren't pouring the monies in. I'm talking about a good 30, 40 years ago. And I came up with the idea called the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group for the community. And the focus was reinvesting in the neighborhoods. I remember those early discussions, early talks very clearly. Back then, they were brutal. They were brutal conversations. How brutal? There was a lot of swearing and cussing going on. There was a lot of the turtle and spider. Scorpion. You know.
Scorpion and frog.
Scorpion and frog, where, you know. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that as we think through where we're at right now, in 10 more years, will we be having the conversation, oh, we lost 10 more thousand African Americans? That's the reflection point. Did we lose? Are we going to lose 10,000 more? And for those or any of us who are saying, no, that's not going to happen because we floated bonds or we did this or we've done that. Well, nah, it's been done before. Tom mentioned the excitement of the people that work with him, etc. I got to throw one tidbit out there, just one, and I'm going to wrap this up. Tom was bold, ruthlessly bold. Very few people remember when we had a place called Three Rivers Stadium. Very few people. I have two recollections of that. One was when we were planning the stages for building the stadiums. Tom was holding meetings in his office, and the banks were gathering. We were thinking about how they were going to get funded. And he pointedly said to one bank, you can't come in. You're not lending in the neighborhood. We're not interested in funding with you. The other one was, and many people forget this, they do forget this. There was a time when we had a referendum on the stadiums. It was not approved.
Right.
The city said, nope, we don't want two new stadiums. Did you know that? Right. They voted it down, said, no, keep the one you got. Tom goes back to the word leadership. He led this city and said, nope, we're tearing them down. And we tore it down and built two world-class stadiums. How many people today would say, get rid of the two stadiums and bring Three Rivers back?
Nobody.
You have to have the ability to look into the future. You have to be prepared to take the darts and the arrows. I don't know, Tom mentioned when he came in that we're old enough now, we don't care what you think. We really don't. I don't know who's prepared to take the darts and arrows to say, we are going to stop the hemorrhaging of the African American community. We're going to fix this. We're going to find out how to make this happen. We're going to figure out how to make the partnerships happen. That's where I'm at. I'm pleased to be a part of a process now funded by NCRC, National Community Reinvestment Coalition in Washington, D.C., that's given us this opportunity, and the Allegheny Foundation to say, we can look at Marshall Shadeland, we can look at affordable housing there, but we can also look at the broader picture in terms of what's happening to these neighborhoods. I can bet you there are going to be 100 people, probably more than that, that'll come up with a lot of different reasons of what we're doing here doesn't make sense. Last point. I tell everybody this. I'm old enough now to only live by 6 rules. Rule number one.
Focus.
Rule number one is focus. Rule number one is focus. Absolute focus. See if you're good. Rule number two.
Faith and family.
Faith and family. Faith and family. When times get tough, whatever, you got to have the focus. Faith and family. Rule number three.
Reading.
You have. I doubt whether or not there is, definitely in the African American community, 50 folk who've read the recent bond issue for affordable housing in the city of Pittsburgh. Given any neighborhood plans that may be out there, I bet that there's not 100 people in those neighborhoods where the plan exists that have read it, that thoroughly understand how it will have an impact. I know in my neighborhood in Manchester, people are asking the question about Chateau Street. You're batting 1,000. What's rule number 4?
Math.
Everything is based upon a mathematical equation. I was a little boy once and I asked my father, I said, what size shoe do you wear? He says, Fit'ems. Fit'ems. I said, what are you talking about? He said, anything fit. Anything fit, I'll wear. I looked at him and I said, you know, Pop, come on. There's a size to everything. So everything we do is based on a mathematical equation. Is it 2 stadiums or 1? Is it the bank in your neighborhood? Everything is based on a mathematical equation. Everything. Rule number 5.
Are we on to 6 or 5?
5.
It's Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou. When people show you who they really are the first time, believe them. Believe it. You don't have to dance around all this stuff. We tell on our, if your best friend smokes a pack of cigarettes and he says to you today, I'm quitting smoking tomorrow. What did he just do?
Lied.
He lied. He lied. He's not quitting smoking cigarettes tomorrow. We tell on ourselves all the time. The last rule kills all the other rules. And we love the last rule. We eat the last rule up. Oh, we love it to death.
Gossip.
Gossip. We love gossiping. We take it to a science. We take it to another level, and we mistake gossip for fact. People will argue you down based upon a tidbit of gossip they have, etc. Well, I want to thank Dan. I want to thank Ray Sean, and I want to thank Mayor Tom Murphy for spending this time with us as we explored the report, the history, and some of the stuff we're going to be doing. Again, we're going to be publishing, by the time you see this, we will have published Pittsburgh's Vanishing Black Neighborhoods. And I will have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in saying that we are at a reflection point. And it's not one of those issues where, oh, we already know that. Oh, yeah, we're working on that. Oh, yeah, we're doing something about that. No. No. If in the next 10 years we lose 10,000 more African Americans in the city of Pittsburgh, that'll tell you what's been done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
All right.
Thanks.
Everybody stay in their seats.
It is